They were the picture of Hollywood perfection. Robert Taylor, the star known as the man with the perfect profile, and Barbara Stanwyck, the fiercely talented actress who had clawed her way from Brooklyn to the top. Their marriage was sold to the world as a fairy tale, a union of two of Tinseltown's brightest stars. They smiled for the cameras, attended the premieres, and lived on sprawling ranches, the very picture of the Golden Age dream. But behind the glamorous photos and studio-approved narratives lay a complicated and messy truth. A truth whispered about for decades but never fully exposed. This is the story of how intense studio pressure, aimed at saving two of its biggest stars from scandal, pushed them into a marriage built on secrets. It's a story of control, betrayal, and a romance that was perhaps too real to survive the artificial world that demanded it. Decades later, as he neared the end of his life, Robert Taylor's own words would finally paint the grim picture of what really happened behind the closed doors of Hollywood's most calculated romance. To understand the story of Robert Taylor and Barbara Stanwyck, you have to understand the world they lived in. This wasn't today's Hollywood. This was the Golden Age, a time when all-powerful studios like Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer or MGM weren't just employers. They were puppet masters. They owned their stars. Actors were bound by ironclad contracts, and their every move was managed by studio chiefs who held the power to make or break them. At the top of this gilded cage sat Louis B. Mayer, the head of MGM, a man who viewed his stars as investments to be protected at all costs. In the late 1930s, Mayer had two very valuable investments. First, there was Robert Taylor. Born in small-town Nebraska, he was molded by MGM into the ultimate matinee idol. He was handsome, charming, and had a quiet nature that made him easy for the studio to control. Taylor was a company man. He rarely made waves and was under contract to MGM for over 2 decades, but his quiet compliance hid a deep dislike of confrontation that would become a tragic flaw in his personal life. Then there was Barbara Stanwyck, 4 years Taylor's senior. She was everything he wasn't. Born Ruby Stevens in Brooklyn, she was an orphan who fought her way out of poverty to become a Broadway star and one of Hollywood's most respected actresses. She was tough, independent, and fiercely ambitious. Where Taylor was agreeable, Stanwyck was a force of nature. One director famously said of her, "She only lives for 2 things, and both of them are work." When they were set up on a date in 1936, the attraction was immediate, but it started as a comfortable friendship. Stanwyck, already a major star, took the younger, less experienced Taylor under her wing. She became his mentor, guiding him through the treacherous landscape of Hollywood. He, in turn, was the old-fashioned gentleman she craved after a traumatic and abusive first marriage to actor Frank Fay. They found common ground in their love for the outdoors and a shared disdain for Hollywood pretense. Soon they were a couple, buying adjoining ranches and spending their time riding horses far from the glitz they represented on screen. But in the Hollywood of the 1930s, governed by the strict Hays Code and studio morality clauses, an unmarried couple living together was a dangerous game. The studios sold their stars as paragons of virtue, and any hint of scandal could spell disaster. For Louis B. Mayer, his top male star cohabiting with an actress was a PR nightmare waiting to happen. For a while, MGM had actually discouraged Taylor from marrying anyone, believing he was more valuable to female fans as a bachelor. That all changed in January 1939. The powerful movie magazine Photoplay published a bombshell article titled "Hollywood's Unmarried Husbands and Wives." The piece sensationally detailed the relationships of prominent couples living together, with Taylor and Stanwyck named right alongside Clark Gable and Carole Lombard. The implication was clear. Hollywood's biggest stars were flouting the very moral standards their films were supposed to uphold. For Louis B. Mayer, this was the last straw. The bad publicity was a fire that needed to be put out immediately. He summoned his top stars and delivered an ultimatum. Gable and Lombard were already heading to the altar. Now it was Robert Taylor and Barbara Stanwyck's turn. The meeting with Louis B. Mayer wasn't a negotiation. It was a command. For the sake of their careers and MGM's public image, Robert Taylor and Barbara Stanwyck would marry. The arrangements, were handled entirely by the studio's publicity department. Their wedding wasn't going to be a private declaration of love, but a public spectacle designed to silence the gossip columns. For Stanwyck, the idea of another marriage was daunting. Her first husband, Frank Fay, had been abusive, his jealousy spiraling as her career eclipsed his. She was hesitant, perfectly happy with the life she had. But Robert Taylor, ever the company man, was given even less of a choice. Years later, he reflected on his own powerlessness in the situation. The entire event was orchestrated by MGM. In a revealing and damning statement about their union, Taylor admitted that the only part he played in his own wedding was to say, "I do." The wedding itself in May 1939 was a hollow affair. After a press reception, the newlyweds immediately went their separate ways. Stanwyck returned to her ranch, while Taylor went home to his doting and ever-present mother. The very next day, it was back to work. Stanwyck was on set for Golden Boy, and Taylor reported to the set of Lady of the Tropics, where he filmed a wedding scene with Hedy Lamarr. Fellow star Joan Crawford remembered that Taylor looked like he'd walked through the entire ceremony in a daze. The fairy tale wedding reported in the papers was a complete fabrication, a business transaction wrapped in satin and lace. From this compulsory beginning, the marriage was on shaky ground. Stanwyck's entire identity was her career. She was driven and focused, and some said she found it difficult to transition from an independent superstar to a doting wife. She reportedly avoided hosting dinner parties with Taylor's friends, finding them dull. Her intensity, so powerful on screen, began to wear on the conflict-avoidant Taylor. The dynamic they'd established as mentor and student started to sour their marriage. Stanwyck considered herself Taylor's teacher, even calling him Junior, while he called her the Queen. It wasn't a marriage of equals. Her forceful personality dominated their life. Friends observed that she mothered him, bossed him around, and plainly embarrassed him in front of his cronies. While Taylor's passivity let her have her way, his resentment quietly grew. He felt diminished by the very strength he had once admired. Their private life, in which they famously slept in separate bedrooms, only fueled persistent lavender marriage rumors that dogged many stars of the era. Stanwyck gave Taylor an immense amount of freedom, but this space only created a chasm between them. It invited him to build a life away from her, and soon he would do just that. The story of this Hollywood power couple only gets more complicated from here, full of public deception and private heartbreak. We're about to get into the betrayals and affairs that shattered this carefully constructed image. If you're fascinated by the hidden truths of Hollywood's golden age, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. The perfect Hollywood marriage began to crumble less than 2 years in. While Barbara Stanwyck remained devoted to the union, Robert Taylor, feeling managed and suffocated, started looking for an escape. His passive nature meant he couldn't confront the problems at home, so he sought comfort elsewhere. His search for validation led to a pattern of infidelity that would break his wife's heart. The first major betrayal came in 1941, during the filming of Johnny Eager. Taylor was cast opposite the sultry Lana Turner. Their on-screen chemistry was electric. The studio even marketed them as Teen T. Off-screen, that chemistry ignited into a passionate affair. Taylor was completely infatuated, reportedly telling friends he felt he would explode if he couldn't be with her. The affair, however brief, was a devastating blow to Stanwyck. How she reacted became the stuff of Hollywood legend. The most shocking and persistent rumor is that upon learning of the affair, a heartbroken Stanwyck attempted to take her own life. Taylor and others later dismissed this, claiming she'd simply injured herself on a window, and Stanwyck herself denied the suicide attempt. But whether it was a genuine attempt or a desperate cry for help, the story of her bandaged wrists spread through Hollywood, a grim symbol of her devastation. This wasn't an isolated incident. The affair with Lana Turner was just the beginning. Throughout their marriage, Taylor was linked to a string of other glamorous actresses, including Eleanor Parker and Ava Gardner. In her own memoir, Gardner would later confirm her affair with Taylor, calling him an excellent lover, a public confirmation of the rumors Stanwyck had been living with for years. Each affair was another crack in the foundation of their fragile marriage. The separations forced on them by World War II, during which Taylor served as a Navy flight instructor, only made things worse. The time apart didn't heal the rift, it just let their lives drift further apart. Stanwyck's frustration with his cheating and emotional distance grew. As Taylor's career gained momentum and he needed her mentorship less, their power dynamic shifted, leading to more conflict. She reportedly criticized him at parties, her public frustration a stark contrast to the happy couple they were meant to be. She was desperate to hold on to him, but her attempts to control the situation only pushed him further away. He supposedly asked for a divorce multiple times, but each time Stanwyck would become so distraught that he would back down, unable to face the confrontation. Their marriage had become a prison for both. He was trapped by his inability to leave, and she was trapped by her inability to let him go. The breaking point finally came in 1949. Robert Taylor traveled to Rome to film the epic Quo Vadis. Compare. From Hollywood and his strained home life, he embraced his freedom. It was there that he began a very public, very brazen affair with an Italian starlet named Lea Di Leo. This wasn't a quiet fling whispered about on backlots. It was splashed across international tabloids. Back in Los Angeles, Barbara Stanwyck saw the pictures of her husband openly carrying on with another woman for the world to see. The private humiliation she'd endured for years was now a public spectacle. It was the final betrayal. Enraged, she boarded a plane and flew to Rome to confront him. The confrontation was the climax of their tragic marriage. By most accounts, Stanwyck arrived threatening divorce. It's widely believed this was a high-stakes bluff, a last-ditch attempt to shock him back into line and make him realize what he was about to lose. She had used this emotional leverage before, and each time his fear of confrontation made him retreat. She expected him to apologize and come home. But this time was different. To her absolute shock, Robert Taylor calmly accepted. The man who had always shrunk from the word divorce now agreed to it without a fight. The bluff had been called. Stanwyck was left reeling. Her final, most powerful card had been played, and she had lost. What followed was a torturous 6 weeks, where Stanwyck remained in Italy, negotiating the terms of their separation. Photos from that time show a strained couple going through the motions in public while their private world collapsed. The divorce was officially filed on February 21, 1951, ending their 12-year union. As part of the settlement, the court made a decision that would financially tie them together for the rest of Taylor's life. Stanwyck was granted 15% of his gross earnings until she died or remarried. Since she never remarried, she collected a significant portion of his income for nearly 2 decades, a constant, and some said bitter reminder of their failed partnership. For Barbara Stanwyck, the divorce was a quiet devastation. A lifelong workaholic, she took a rare break from acting to grieve. In the years that followed, she would privately refer to Robert Taylor as the great love of her life. She never remarried. For 30 years, she supposedly carried a gold cigarette case he had given her, engraved with his face, a private memento of the man she had lost. Years after his death, when a theater offered to replace their cracked hand and footprint slab, she refused, because it would mean losing his next to hers. Robert Taylor, on the other hand, quickly moved on. In 1952, he met a German actress named Ursula Thiess. In her, he seemed to find the traditional wife he had always wanted. Ursula gave up her career to become a housewife and mother, a stark contrast to the ambitious Stanwyck. They married in 1954, had 2 children, and settled on a large ranch. By all accounts, Taylor finally found the personal happiness that had eluded him for so long. It was in these later years, as a husband and father, that Taylor began to reflect on his first marriage with a mix of regret and respect. There wasn't one big tell-all interview. The revelation of the truth came in bits and pieces through candid conversations with friends and biographers. He spoke about the immense pressure from MGM to marry Stanwyck, confirming it was a union born of studio coercion. He confessed to feeling overwhelmed by Stanwyck's powerful personality, admitting their marriage suffered from a fundamental mismatch. He acknowledged his own failings, his fear of confrontation that led him to seek escape in affairs rather than face the problems at home. But his reflections were not just about blame. He consistently referred to Stanwyck with deep reverence, calling her his greatest teacher. This was the so-called disgusting truth he revealed. Not a simple story of a villain and a victim, but a complex tragedy. The disgust wasn't for Stanwyck, but for the rotten foundation their marriage was built on. The studio control, the public lies, and his own weakness in the face of it all. In 1969, Robert Taylor, a heavy smoker, was dying of lung cancer at 57. In a remarkable act of grace, his wife Ursula invited Barbara Stanwyck to the hospital to say goodbye. After his death, Barbara was reportedly inconsolable at his funeral, her grief a testament to the powerful, complicated love that had defined so much of her life. The marriage of Robert Taylor and Barbara Stanwyck was never the fairy tale Hollywood sold. It was a partnership pushed into existence by a studio trying to protect its assets. It was the story of two very different people, one ambitious and intense, the other passive and yearning for a quiet life, forced into a role that was destined to fail. Robert Taylor's late-in-life confessions paint a picture of a man trapped by his own agreeable nature, pushed into a marriage he wasn't ready for and who lacked the courage to end it honorably. His betrayals were the desperate acts of a man suffocating in a life he didn't choose. Barbara Stanwyck, a survivor in every other aspect of her life, became a victim of her own heart. Clinging to a man who couldn't give her what she needed, she never remarried. A silent, lifelong tribute to the man she always called the love of her life. Their story reveals a system where stars were pawns and their personal lives were sacrificed for box office receipts. The disgusting truth of their marriage is the truth of that system, a machine that manufactured dreams for the public by creating nightmares for its stars.